And welcome back to Meeting of the Minds. Today I'm here with the great Anthony Stine from Return to Tradition. Anthony, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for your patience and your willingness to do it this way. Part of the reason I don't do this stuff on camera is I have what in internet lingo is best referred to as a potato for a camera, and I put a lot of money into having my spare bedroom in my home turned into reasonably decent sound quality for a home office, including sound dampening tiles. And the problem is half of my office is now coated in black, and so the light just disappears in here. And I have a hard time using a QR code scanner on my phone in my office, let alone like my camera is worthless in here. So, it's going to take me some good, a pretty serious upgrade to the next phase, which needs to come after I lose a few pounds. So thanks for your patience.
No problem. I'm just appreciative to get to talk to you about all this. So I guess take it from the top. Tell us about your background. Were you born Catholic? How did you start your ministry? How did everything happen?
When I was a kid, I remember my grandmother had been a lapsed Catholic, and when I was a teenager, she returned to the faith and pointed to all my siblings, and I have a fair number of siblings, and my parents weren't religious, and they were like, "You're all going to come to Mass with me, including you, Anthony," and I was the one who said no. They all went with her, and it was weird because they'd go with her, and then I'd go and go on a long walk on a Sunday morning and sometimes listen to like Lutheran radio or something. So
yeah,
I don't know why I was not willing to go with her. And in hindsight, sometimes I kick myself for not having gone with her, because I could have I get the feeling like if you spend as long as an adult as I did living as a sort of a lefty agnostic secularist, it's a lot easier to correct some of those issues if you come in, if you enter the church and you really work on virtue from
sure.
younger than older. But now I'm the only one who's a Catholic, and all my siblings have essentially apostatized except for my one of my sisters, and she just became a schismatic and joined some feel good rock concert Christianity stuff. So
oh boy.
But I'm not going to give go over my whole background. So I'm saving that for a live stream or a video or something, because it's really convoluted. But I do joke that I someday want to write a biography called "How Heavy Metal Music Led Me to Jesus Christ," just because of the provocative title alone would be would be spectacular. But I entered the church as an adult several years later. That was in the 90s, and this was into the 21st century when I entered the church. But I was in graduate school and working in student leadership, and I met somebody who, you ever had that moment in life where you see somebody and it's like your guardian angel is tapping on the shoulder and saying, "Hey, get to know that person. This is important."
Oh yeah.
I had that, and it was a young female friend of mine, and I immediately went through, okay, is this just some sort of lustful thing? And immediately was no. That was definitely not what it was. So it turned out, and this was somebody that I kind of worked with in student activism on campus, which is why I also hit I hit the socialism, communism stuff a lot, because I know it firsthand. I know it very well firsthand.
Right.
And this person turned out to be a Catholic who we now have very different disagreements on, because I don't know if the rad trad thing applies to me, but I'm definitely I liken myself as a traditionalist, and this person is I'm glad the Pope changed the teaching on the death penalty, even if it's not legal for him to do so, type of person. To give you an idea, right? The kind of friend I mute on Facebook during the election season. But they taught me the base. They gave me enough information that I eventually found myself in an RCIA program with I would say a traditionally minded permanent deacon who doesn't, he doesn't get into all the, inter-Catholic squabbles, but he fully believes in our Lord and the church and, the Great Commission and all of it, the important stuff, right? And the Eucharist, the real presence. And during RCIA, he would sit there and talk about seamlessly weave in, the pro-life stuff into RCIA in the early weeks of RCIA. And this was in Portland, Oregon. So you can imagine how awkward that must have been for him, because the priest there wasn't willing to talk about this stuff at all.
Wow.
You might understand why. Again, it's Portland, Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
But I entered the church, and after a few years, I'm in my PhD program. I'm looking for a dissertation topic, and I'm spending more time, listening and reading things like The Remnant and other things, and really beginning to notice there's a problem in the church. And I'm looking for a dissertation topic. Then all of a sudden, Pope Francis, who at the time I liked, especially when he would talk about pro-life stuff, because say what you want about Pope Francis when he calls people who hire, who hire the what I call the Moloch worshippers, who hire those medical professionals, if you want to call them that, to perform that procedure. He calls them called it akin to hiring a hitman.
Hitman, right?
Right. That's like one of my favorite things he's ever said. But I read Laudato Si, and I hadn't read any papal encyclicals before, and I thought it was great. And then my red pill moment was reading Rerum Novarum right afterwards, because I had a basic understanding of what Catholic social teaching kind of sort of was, but I hadn't read any of the source material. And when I read Rerum Novarum, which is, give you an idea, Laudato Si is a small book.
Yeah.
Rerum Novarum is a long essay. It's like 40-page essay. Like you could go into a peer-reviewed journal, and there are longer articles there than Rerum Novarum.
I just finished Laudato Si. I finished Rerum Novarum probably about 5 months ago. Yep.
Right. And you can understand then if I read one and then the other, it's jarring, the difference. That was when I realized there was something wrong. All the stuff that I was hearing on, Sensus Fidelium and other places something was wrong. And so that's when I really began to dive into Catholic social teaching. And that's when it inevitably led me to have to, address the modernism question and all these other things. And so fast forward, I, had this kind of terrible job early in my PhD program, working at, not terrible job, but it was, I was working in a grocery store in Portland, Oregon, and I was looking for like a way out of Portland. I just knew I had to get out, and I wanted something in my field, and I applied for a job at a Catholic university in Oklahoma. I get the job. I get here. 8 months later, the place closes. I was hired to be like this glorified, assistant in this program, but the director really took a second look at my resume and said, you're really overqualified for this, and I need help writing a grant. So you want to help me write this $1 million grant? And I said, yes.
It's great.
And we were going to get it too. Like we knew we were going to get it. Like we had all these people whose job it was to write these grants for people, and they took a look at what we were doing and like, yeah, you're going to get this. And then we didn't, and then we went out of business. So, and I got a job in the higher education usury business at another university, lost that job, financial aid. And when I lost that job, I started applying for jobs, but I started my channel going, hey, if God wants me to do this, he'll let me know. And my channel started getting popular. Vigano happened, and I put his letter up, and that's when my channel really took off, honestly. And I started putting content on a regular basis, trying to be different than other Catholic commentators. And about the time I did my 300th job application was when, YouTube decided they'd, throw me a few dollars every month for doing what I do. And that's where I am now. It's weird because I never expected to be where I'm at right now. Like I look at like all these other people, all these other Catholic commentators, and I'm like, how am I like, getting views comparable to to them compared, as long as you factor in my subscriber rate. So it's weird. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's funny how the Lord works. You never know where you're going to end up.
Right. I remember having this time. I'm a convert, and like most converts, and hopefully most Catholic men in general, I spent my time doing my due diligence and discerning the priesthood. And I had an experience where I realized I needed to dedicate my life to the church, but the priesthood turned out not to be the case. It's weird. Once my discernment formally ended, about 2 weeks later, my wife and I started seeing each other. So
look at that. Yeah,
funny how that works out, right? By the way, that's how you. I figured that had to be an endorsement from on high. Like, okay, well done. You did this. You did the right thing. But here, time to go on to the next step, and because you're behind the curve here. Because, my wife and I got married when I was 37. So
that's great. That's great. Yeah. So I guess, as you kind of alluded to about a big change being around the Vatican II mark. I mean, for me, I read a lot of the papal encyclicals from the 19th century, hard-hitting, fighting the modern errors, and then you start looking at what was put out after Vatican II, and it seems a little bit different. So, when did that hit you? When did that hit you? What are your opinions on that? Do we scrap the whole thing, or do we just go line by line and take what's in line with tradition and get rid of what is not? What are your thoughts?
What the things that Bishop Schneider referred to in his recent public letters that should be saved, I think you could fit into an encyclical or two, and you could back them up with the power of papal infallibility or the next best thing, honestly. So the things that were said about Our Lady and the laity and the magisterium, that stuff can be fit into an encyclical almost certainly, even if it's a little long. There are certain documents that no one complains about, like the document on the Eastern rites of the church needing to de-Latinize. So I had a friend of mine, the best man at my wedding is a Maronite. And I've been to their Divine Liturgy a few times, and it's the most Novus Ordo of all Eastern rites I've ever seen. Priest faces the people. A lot of the liturgy is in like the local vernacular. So yeah, a lot of it's in, Arabic and I guess Syrian or something, but the rest of it is in English. And I'm like, this is weird because I went to a Byzantine liturgy, Ukrainian Byzantine, and that was not in English. The whole thing was sung and it was beautiful, like a traditional Latin mass. And they had a root screen too, which was really cool.
Yeah.
But I'm on team basically scrap the whole thing. Say, what can be saved, put it in an encyclical. I'm not on the hermeneutic of continuity. I cannot comprehend how you do a hermeneutic of continuity from the same people who said that that Vatican II was the French Revolution in the church, because they said that. Like, how do you do a hermeneutic of continuity when you admit it as a revolution? And they did all the things revolutionaries do. Go look at what's going on in the broader culture right now. I mean, they stripped the parishes of a lot of Catholic art. They destroyed high altars and they replaced them with Cranmer tables. I mean, they did what revolutionaries do, and including try to bury the past. You ever notice that they rarely do they ever mention precedents before the council? Documents, everything. Yeah. Like, when was the last time you heard, was it Casti Canubi or Consti Canubi? I always can never say it right, but people say Humanae Vitae is the greatest thing ever. I'm like, you could have fit all the really good stuff from Humanae Vitae into a 3-page encyclical, probably 5-page if Paul VI was feeling really verbose, and just had it basically opening paragraph be everything said in this other encyclical, because Casti Canubi was Humanae Vitae before there was Humanae Vitae. And it's a brilliant encyclical, but you never hear that this continuity, except the only exceptions were the Catholic social teaching encyclicals until Laudato Si. So
right, yeah, and I mean that's what I kind of saw too. Also, that it's pretty much everyone goes back, and it was a pastoral council, but it seems like all priests and bishops they speak about it as if it's dogmatic and doctrinal.
They speak about it the way we speak about the Council of Trent. So, fun fact: the Council of Trent produced the only catechism ever declared to be infallible for all time.
Wow.
You can use a Council of Trent, you can use the Catechism of Trent, and it is just as good today as it was then, and it's just as error-free. Whereas when John Paul II's catechism came out, what did the I can't remember the name of the cardinal who put it together for him, but that cardinal, as soon as it came out, said, yeah, this thing's going to need to be revised. It's a mess.
I didn't know that. I didn't hear that before.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it seems like some of the teachings are much more straightforward. It seems like it's much easier to understand the Council of Trent, because I guess it was dealing right around the time of Protestantism, really. So, I mean, everything had to be razor sharp, hair splitting, very clear what our faith is and what it's not.
Right. But then again, we were dealing with the sexual revolution in the 60s. That was in high gear. We were dealing with, I mean, frankly, cultural Marxism on the rise across the West, the rise of impurity and communism. And usually councils are called to deal with the heresy of the day. And communism has been described as a heresy, and not a peep about communism or socialism in those encyclicals.
Nothing on communism, nothing on modernism.
Right. You would think, like, there's a strong rumor that there was some documents found in Pius XII's archives recently that he was getting an encyclical ready to condemn modernism just before he died.
Wow.
Yeah, I would bet that the ghostwriter for that was going to be Cardinal Ottaviani, if I had to guess. Or Archbishop Lefebvre, because Archbishop Lefebvre was apparently pretty close with the Pope at the time.
Makes sense, yeah. And I remember hearing that Lefebvre. One of the things with him, he said he credits his understanding of tradition to his studies as a seminarian who studied very much the 19th century encyclicals.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Those encyclicals. There's a lot of encyclicals and then other books that were published that received a mandatum from the Vatican that if you read them, they make you very uncomfortable, especially if you're an American, because like there's a book I keep trying to get people to read. It's called Liberalism is a Sin, and it has a mandatum from the Vatican on it in it. Wow. And the first opening pages of it detail how there was a debate going on about, is classical liberalism in line with Catholicism, or is it condemned? Is it to be condemned? And 2 books are written by the competing voices, both submitted to the Vatican. Liberalism is got the imprimatur, and the other one was formally suppressed. The one
makes sense.
I would bet.
But
I would bet that Acton Institute or Discovery Institute probably have it published somewhere if you want to read the other one, since we don't have an index of forbidden books anymore, unfortunately. But they say that as a guy working on a PhD, who has to play nice with liberal concepts and socialist concepts in my dissertation just to get it approved. But
that makes a lot of sense. But reading anything before 1950 or before 1960, it's pretty clear. Yeah, it's condemned.
Right.
Classic liberalism is nowhere near Christianity.
Right. I mean, people try to say Robert Bellarmine and others, but I mean, at the end of the day, I'll take papal authority over any of the. I'll take the papal authority of any of the pre-modernist popes, and even some of the better modernist popes, honestly, over any of these guys, as long as what the modern. Well, maybe we'll scratch the modernist popes, but you know what I mean. Any sound pope over any of these other figures, because the external sign of unity in the faith is the papacy, not the doctors of the church.
Right.
Not that they're not important, but they are. But the papacy is the ultimate authority in the church, essentially.
Right. And like you said, a lot of these old encyclicals, they have it. I remember speaking to a seminarian who just became a deacon, and for him, he was saying about Casti Connubii. It's like, oh, no one wants to talk about that now. That's almost like, oh, heaven forbid a priest talks about that. Right.
Another one that I think is like that is Libertas by Leo XIII.
Yep.
Leo XIII is. I'm not wild about canonizing popes who didn't have who weren't performing miracles while alive. But if there was ever a pope who should be probably a saint who doesn't fit the classical way of doing it, it's probably Leo XIII. Like his if only so he could be named a doctor of the church. That his contributions were crazy. And Libertas is one of those encyclicals that people need to read.
Yeah,
it's again about that sort of liberalism and Americanism sort of issue.
I could vouch for that. It's unmistakably clear.
Yeah.
There's no confusion. And then what happened with Laudato Si? Where did things go wrong there?
It's the things that I noticed, and I said this in the first draft of my dissertation, and my advisor, who is very much not on the same page as you and I, said basically, I said this, that there was clearly a disjunction in Catholic social teaching with the council.
Right.
And he gave me a lot of notes that it was just easier for me to delete it, to delete that section. I'll say I have that draft still, and I'll save it for something else in the future. But there's clearly a disjunction in after the council. And it's all part of the opening the windows of the church to the world. You see an embrace of technocracy, bureaucracy, supranational organizations, all the stuff that I studied in my PhD program, but stuff that doesn't really make a lot of sense in a Catholic context. Like, it should have been alarming for Catholics when Pope Paul VI went to the United Nations in the 60s. Now, maybe in the 60s, the UN wasn't as clearly a anti-Catholic organization as it is now, but this stuff should have surprised people, but it didn't. And that's how we got, and that's what I sometimes joke that I think Pope Francis should have taken the name Pope Paul VII, because it seems like he's just continuing that sort of legacy.
Try to keep in line. Hopefully we get hopefully our next pope is Pope Pius XIII.
Depends who the cardinal or bishop, or maybe if we really want to get old school, layman is secular priest that they choose for that. A lot of people don't know that Pius X was like an archpriest. Yeah, he was a quote unquote lowly priest.
Yeah. Well, and he understood a lot about human nature. He understood a lot about people.
Right, he did. And he was a miracle worker in his time too. That's why he's a kid. So he was canonized under the old rules. Before him, the previously canonized pope was Pius V.
Oh wow! Yeah.
And now, which is why it's also one of the things that I always found funny looking at that history, as figuring out that there was something seriously wrong with the state of the church today, was going from that to every pope who has died since the council has been canonized except John Paul I, and didn't they elevate him to venerable or blessed already?
Oh, I'm not sure. Or wasn't he supposed to be wasn't he supposed to be one of the conservative ones? But then there's rumors that he was taken out because he was more traditional.
I like Dr. Marshall's take on that, which is take a look at his name.
Yeah.
John Paul. I mean, come on. Probably not. So,
yeah.
But
I suppose that makes sense.
You know, there's the Godfather 3 theory about his death. And I think somebody like Malachi Martin endorsed that theory, which was essentially that the mob took him out. I don't know. It's a little weird that a pope was, you know, in there for 30 days or whatever it was, and then he died mysteriously.
Yeah. But you definitely say they're definitely trying to canonize the council.
Oh, absolutely.
All the people. Yeah. Unbelievable. Which leads us to today. As you said about cultural Marxism and the whole takeover, COVID, the lockdowns, priests letting people die without the sacraments, MIA bishops, statues being torn down. What are your thoughts on all this mess?
My favorite was that during what I call the affliction, because of our glorious hosts here don't like people talking about, you know, the affliction without their permission. But they, my favorite example of just how insane things have gotten was that in the Archdiocese of Chicago, a notice was put out that no baptisms, including emergency baptisms, could not be given without the permission of a bishop.
Yeah.
Now, I want you to think about that. You and I, as members of the faithful, honestly, random Joe, non-Catholic on the street, doesn't believe, can do it too, as long as they intend to do what the church intends to do with baptism. We walk down the street and there's a person who, you know, brick falls off the side of a building, brains them, and they're all dying on the street and they want baptism. What are we supposed to get on our cell phone and, like, you know, go onto Google? What's the chancery's office number? Hey, can I get the auxiliary bishops? Oh, the guy died without baptism. It's insane, right? Like this is by the way where the right ordered sense of the personal conscience comes in. You as a Catholic don't have the duty to follow those dictates if they violate your personal conscience. If your conscience is well formed, most of the time that never comes up. But in this circumstance, you have every right to be disobedient to the bishop.
Yeah,
because there's a soul on the line.
Yeah, and my understanding, canon law, they can't forbid the sacraments to the faithful who are asking for them with good reason. Although there might be with the new canon law, the 83 Code of Canon Law, maybe there's so many loopholes that you could make it justified to mean it whatever you want it to be.
Could be. I hope not. I hope that's not the case. But again, there you see the ambiguity again. What I think Vigano called the weaponized ambiguity is all through that Code of Canon Law, just like it is everywhere else.
Yeah, crazy. And now hearing about the coming vaccine, possibly a tattoo. What do you think? Could that be the mark of the beast? Doesn't sound good. I heard about luciferase being used to be able to see the whole thing.
Well, my thinking on all of this is that, I don't think the Antichrist is, going to show up immediately. But I think people get this idea that when he shows up and he is a person, that is a matter of the faith, that the Antichrist is a person and is going to be on the scene at some point. I don't think he's going to show up and in the 3 years or whatever it is that most of the doctors of the church agree he's going to be on Earth for, if he's going to set up this whole system in 3 years. I think he's going to sit there and have all the pieces there ready for him to use to do his evil work. And, it's really strange. They know that these people know that there is great pushback about getting that vaccine. So what a lot of countries talking about doing now, not permitting you to travel into their country unless you can prove you've been vaccinated.
Right.
And so is it the mark of the beast? I don't know. Is it something that will enable the mark of the beast to be a lot easier to give out to everybody? Probably, even if it doesn't turn out to be some sort of subcutaneous virtual chip like people are thinking it might be.
Yeah, it makes sense. And seeing a lot of this stuff in private revelation, prophecy, right? Obviously, you got Fatima, which has got to be the most important one of the 20th century. What would you say are maybe some of the least known prophecies that everyone should know?
My favorite one that I keep going back to is that of Alois Erlmeyer. He was a German mystic who the thing that people have a problem with him on is that he was a dowser, and the church never took a formal position on dowsing other than to say, as long as you credit it as having that talent as having come from heaven, then there's not a problem. But if you have it say it comes from somewhere else, then there's a problem. You're engaging in divination or whatever. But he said he had a vision of the Virgin Mary and immediately became a dowser afterwards. He says it came from that. That's where it came from. But he also had mystical experiences like visions and things. And in the 50s, he had visions of like Russia invading Europe and going all the way into Germany, and like as weird as it sounds, the U.S. and China having a conflict that comes to our shores, and the whole thing. And it sounds in isolation crazy until you put it together with other visions of the church, including like Pius X's vision that sounds an awful lot like the released Third Secret of Fatima, and other mystics who talked about the red flag of Russia over the Dome of St. Peter's, and a massive war leading to the Pope fleeing the Vatican and things. And that's why I like Alois Sormel. I almost feel like he's like the missing link to borrow a term from our cultural enemies, but I think in Catholic prophecy, and it's why I pay attention to what's going on with China and Russia, and I get a little worried when I see both of them, testing our military capabilities right now.
Yeah. Any relation, any of this to the great monarch and the great Pope? Prophecies say that's going to come before or after the Antichrist.
That one I'm not sure. The timetable is very different. It's a subject of debate among Catholics, people who pay attention to this stuff. I tend to think that the great monarch comes before the Antichrist, and the great monarch comes after, like, the whatever the chastisements, the material chastisement will be at the culmination of that war. I can't imagine France being in a position to permit the great monarch to reclaim his family's throne, short of their system totally falling apart due to a cataclysmic war.
Yeah.
And it's also why, when it comes to the debate about the Third Secret of Fatima, I tend to be on the side of the full secret wasn't released, and it's going to be the instrumentality of Russia. Like, they're going to do something horrific, absolutely unthinkable, and that we have completely misjudged their capabilities. But given that in the United States right now, we've spent the last 4 years trying to, our government trying to, stage a soft coup instead of paying attention to the actual threats from overseas. It's, it wouldn't shock me if we got, caught unaware.
Yeah. So do you think that third secret is related to Russia directly, or the church and the Vatican? What would be happening within the walls?
I think it has to do. I think a lot of our problems come from the fact that the consecration was not done as requested by 1960. Yeah. That's, I think, part of it. I'm firmly on team John Paul II didn't do the consecration, because John Paul II said he was doing the consecration that Pius XII did, and Pius XII didn't read the Third Secret of Fatima until 1957. I don't know, what day are you putting this up? Are you putting this up today or tomorrow?
Whenever. I could throw it up today.
Okay, because the only reason I mention this is I've actually got a video coming soon on the final message of Fatima from Sister Lucia before 1960. It's her interview with Father Fuentes, and there's, in my research for it, I know why Pius XII never did the consecration, because he didn't read the Third Secret of Fatima until he was pretty much too old to do it, until he was surrounded by modernists on all sides. If he had done it during World War II, if he had read the Third Secret in 1944 when it was penned, he might have been able to, prevent the Cold War. He might have been able to have can you imagine if, like, after the war, the Russian military had done a coup and there had been a massive conversion and we had our age of peace, like you and I would be born into this Catholic world. I mean, it'd be amazing. Didn't happen.
No, absolutely. And I heard that Pope Pius XII, that towards the end of his pontificate, was he starting to get more liberal or more soft on everything? What was the story there?
Well, I mean, I think he was getting taken. I think he in his infirmity, he was getting taken advantage of by men like Annibale Bugnini. Never trust a man named Hannibal, right?
Right. That's true.
The guy who, during Pius XII's pontificate, redid the Holy Week liturgy in 1955. Right. Yeah. So that's why I don't think Pius XII did the consecration, not because he was, super liberal, but because he was gotten to the point where he couldn't really do much. They were probably by then already eyeballing who they were going to put up for the next pope. Yeah, that makes sense. And then I'm moving towards the SSPX and their claim on jurisdiction, and the whole John Paul II, the letters going back and forth between him and Cardinal Ratzinger. What's your take on all that? I mean, if you are Archbishop Lefebvre and you watch the crazy years of the 70s and 80s unfold, culminating with a pope letting idols of pagans be put up on the altar and our Lord taken out of the tabernacle and his crucifix is taken down outside of a historic chapel, and don't think that he legitimately thought there was a state of emergency in the church, I don't know what people can think. And I understand that the the issue with those consecrations is more than just, canon law, that there's theological questions about, piety and charity. But I mean, he asked the Vatican for permission for years, and they kept stringing him along. I'm firmly on the side of the Lefebvre probably didn't do anything wrong, except maybe in choosing the quality of his bishops or not consecrating enough bishops.
Yeah, and it seems then if that's the case, this man is going to one day be a great, great saint who's possibly almost single-handedly, with the grace of God, preserved most of the tradition.
Yeah, I put him up there. I tend to think of him in sort of among the same group as like Saint Athanasius, right?
Yeah.
Who he was him against most of the hierarchy too.
Yeah.
And I say that as a guy who goes to mass with the FSSP every Sunday, right? I don't go to mass with the SSPX, but again, I don't understand the divisions that this stuff causes amongst people who are seeking the truth and about what's going on, when in a time we have, we're dealing with the aftermath of the Pachamama thing, which is Assisi but worse. And we're just,
right.
The church is openly allying itself now with the likes of Jeffrey Sachs and population control people. Like, things are so bad that if or when the SSPX does another round of consecrations, if it's under this pontificate, I don't think very many people will blame them.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I was the last mass that closed down by me. So basically what happened for me, I've learned a lot about Vatican II and everything and Lefebvre. And then right before the whole COVID thing broke, it was, we're not allowed to receive communion on the tongue. That's what we were told from our priest. And he said that's what came directly from our bishop. So at this point, I bought every book I could on Lefebvre, because I was like, I think he has a point here, because what happens when you have these leaders who are acting unjustly against canon law? So I started studying about that, and pretty much then the last mass to shut down near me was an SSPX parish about 25 minutes away. So that was the first time I'd ever gone to a society mass. And then the first one that opened was SSPX again. And that priest, Father Robinson, was the one who was suing the governor of New Jersey with Christopher Ferrara as his lawyer. And
right.
they, kept masses open. But yeah, that was him. So that was the only one that was open there.
Right. So in my state of Oklahoma, the only chapel that is open without social distancing and saying high masses is the SSPX parish in sort of in Oklahoma City. It's it's one of those sort of like belligerently unincorporated places in the city, trying not to be part of the major metropolitan area. And that chapel there's beautiful, and it's tiny. But like I said, I go to mass with the FSSP. I go to, and for those who care, I'm in the Tulsa FSSP parish, which is, there's some people, if you know how to spot people, you might recognize a few people there actually. And it's one of the oldest FSSP parishes, and we have low masses on Sundays right now. No high mass. I don't know why. I don't know why, other than the fact that we now only have one priest, and he's saying 3 to 5 masses on Sundays. So, low mass takes about half the time of a high mass.
Yeah. I bet one of my real good friends, who I speak with, who's from Oklahoma, actually, he was an Olympian, 3-time NCAA champ, Eric Guerrero. He probably goes over there, because I know he's very big with the Latin Mass. We have a Catholic wrestlers group. We do it once a week call and everything, and he probably goes over there. But
if he doesn't, he probably goes to the FSSP chapel or parish up north of Oklahoma City, because we have 2 in our state. I don't go there that often, partially because half the roads there say, turn around, don't drown on them, which tells me that, I can only go to that parish during the hot months of the year safely. So yeah, it's the Tulsa one is all on highways. I don't have to worry about it.
All right. Nice. Yeah. Cause for me, normally I'm either going to an FSSP, Institute of Christ the King, or a diocesan priest who celebrates the Latin Mass. We got 2 of those that are nearby. That's the benefit of being in New York City, that if nothing else, there's a lot going on.
Are you considering your exit though from New York City, like a lot of people are right now?
Yes, definitely planning that. My wife is giving birth though again in 4 weeks, so
that complicates things a bit.
It does.
Well, congratulations though.
Thank you. Yeah, so crazy, but I feel like I didn't have any qualms about going to SSPX when everything else shut down. In my mind, it's the traditional Latin Mass. I see Lefebvre's point, and now that things are open more, I'm going back to the diocesan priest who does Mass.
Right.
Latin Mass.
For those who are curious, the church says that you can go to an SSPX mass and donate to their, to their collection and everything else, as long as you don't have a quote schismatic intentions, whatever that means. And Bishop Athanasius Schneider, on behalf of Pope Francis, spent a lot of time with the SSPX and came back and said there is absolutely no signs whatsoever that they're schismatic. That all we're having right now, that all they have is a no formal canonical status. That's the most recent word from the Vatican, and it's from a good bishop. People may not like all of his takes, but go back and read his letter about communion on the tongue at the beginning of this COVID thing.
Yes, which was excellent.
Yeah, it's the one I keep going back to.
It's the safest way to receive communion. It's the best way to receive communion.
And it helps to avoid sacrilege too, and worse, like with the Satanists that are like they stole a tabernacle in North Carolina, just before all their scheduled marches that never happened. Yeah.
No, I just interviewed Zachary King, and who used to be a high wizard or whatever in Satanism, and he said that basically the way they would steal the Eucharist, they would receive in the hand, put it in their pocket, take like they put it in their mouth, and they would bring it back and desecrate the Blessed Sacrament, which is terrible. So you can't have that. That doesn't happen if you receive on the tongue, because it starts disintegrating. It starts decomposing or whatever immediately.
Right, and it's a weird endorsement though from the Satanists about the trueness of the Catholic faith when they're not doing black praise and worship services. They're not doing Black Hillsong United. Right, they're not doing evil versions of this stuff. They're doing the Catholic Mass, and they're doing a mockery of the traditional Latin Mass. And as I understand it, they actually have to have the person who says the Latin Mass be an actual ordained Catholic priest.
Wow,
that's what I understand. I might be wrong about that though. I want to actually find like a Satanist who is, who has truly converted to have a conversation with about this stuff.
Yeah, but, it sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
So what do you think about now? I guess as we said in the beginning of the conversation, talking about YouTube censorships. Do you know when it's happening? What are some key terms that you're seeing raise red flags for them?
It looks like it's people who are taking a harsh stance on the race issue of any kind, and that can be a trouble for some like people who are willing to go places in their Catholic commentary that the rest of us aren't really willing to go. Because there's certain issues, the hot button issues that the church spilled a lot of ink on historically that we just can't touch. There are papal encyclicals I cannot record for my channel.
Wow.
So and these are people who mostly secularists, like some channels I didn't even think to check actually that I'm subscribed to. Well, no, I got a video on so one person I thought was going to get nailed didn't. That's a Catholic commentator who does secular commentary named Vincent James, the Red Elephants. He didn't get nailed. I thought he was going to. Yeah. But like a guy like Stefan Molyneux got nuked off YouTube today. E. Michael Jones got a strike today on YouTube. So, yeah. So I'm just playing nice, being careful. Continuing like for some reason they don't mind that I'm talking about communism, even though I'm literally talking about all the stuff in the news right now. When I do it, I'm just not using certain terms.
And the terms is probably what they're flagging, right? To take a short
that is because if you're monetized like I am, they have they do the review of the video you upload to see if it conforms to their standards with an algorithm. So like my Bishop Schneider video that I did last week was just reading his letter. It got flagged as not suitable for monetization, but I had it manually reviewed and it took 17 reviewers to approve it. And you know why?
Why? Because
he used the term false religion. I'm pretty sure that's what did it.
Wow.
Yeah. YouTube didn't permit religious channels at all being monetized for the longest time.
Wow.
So.
Unbelievable.
So just my advice, if you hear me referring to the Bureau of Land Management on my channel, I'm not talking about the federal agency that manages all the vast tracts of federal land, which by the way, the federal government controls 30% of the square mileage in the country through the Bureau of Land Management. I'm not talking about them. Break the name down into its acronyms. You know who I'm talking about.
Good thinking. Smart. You're a smart man. All right, so I guess end up a little bit positive. What are some of your favorite classical Catholic books?
Oh, depend on what do you mean by classical? Like
older books, spirituality, about faith, anything.
So one of my favorites is, and I stopped recording them from my channel when I started realizing that the further you got into it, the worse it was. The terms of service, the brushing up against the terms of service you're going to have into, dovetailing right off our previous topic, was St. Basil the Great's Hexameron, which goes into the creation of the world, Genesis, day by day. Wow. And I've got like the first 3 or 4 parts of it, and I think I stopped because, one, it was really dense stuff, but also because St. Basil the Great actually is on lists of our enemies as being problematic. I like that, but I also like Chesterton's The Everlasting Man as a weird spiritual book that he wrote, but that's purely fiction. But when you realize what he's doing, it's actually a spiritual book for contemplating. Is The Man Who Was Thursday. It's a great book. Such a great book by him. Chesterton's one of my favorites. I think I credit Chesterton and Fulton Sheen with me avoiding modernism, actually. But
tremendous.
Yeah. And Dale Ahlquist does good work. That's how I found Chesterton was was here on YouTube with
great.
with Dale Ahlquist's corny EWTN show about Chesterton. But
any questions for him tomorrow? Because I'm interviewing him tomorrow, actually.
Oh, maybe before.
Or think about it. Send them to me.
Yeah, I just might do that because I do appreciate what he does with the Chesterton Society. So I'll think about that. But that one, a good book, if you're a young man discerning the priesthood, or even a not so young man discerning the priesthood, because there are paths to the priesthood for older men, is a book by Fulton Sheen called The Priest Is Not His Own. That book is magnificent. You read 2 pages and then you put it down, not because it's a chore to read, but because you now want to savor what you read and really contemplate, because he doesn't waste a letter in that book. It's a wonderful work. I recommend it for anybody discerning the priesthood. Those are the things. Those are the ones. Maybe some of there's also De Waal's sort of Lives of the Saints fiction works that he did, where he takes and dramatizes the lives of the saints into sort of a fictional narrative, but it's not terribly fictional. He adds like a couple fictional characters to make it be fiction. His book on St. Augustine. What was St. Augustine? What's that tag? What's that phrase that's always associated with?
Our heart is restless until it rests in you.
Yeah, it's got a title.
Yourself a word. Yeah.
Yes, and it's got a title like that. That one on him is fantastic if you really want to learn about St. Augustine.
Excellent. I guess I realized I could have tightened up my question a little bit. So I guess what would be maybe if you wanted to form someone in solid Catholic teachings, traditional Catholic teachings, what are like 2 or 3 books or resources that you would say? And then maybe, so it's solid tradition. And then what would be the books that you would recommend or resources to start red pilling someone who's now solid in their Catholic faith? And now you really need to start learning what's kind of going on behind the scenes.
If somebody wants to if someone is open to the Catholic faith, I would probably start them with something easy, like probably some of Chesterton's work. Probably The Everlasting Man is helpful, especially if they come from a Christian background already. If Jesus Christ isn't that big of a blockade for people, if the Son of Man isn't that isn't a stumbling block for them really, then that's a good one, because that book really begins with the man in the cave, the caveman,
right?
And then it shifts gears to the God man who was born in the cave, and it's masterfully done. I would do that. That's one I would do. Fulton Sheen's got some pretty light but really penetrating things to work with, but he's also got things if you really want to get red pilled, like things that he wrote that are. I got accused when I uploaded one of his essays that I read of it being something I wrote. And I was flattered, actually. I was like, I wish I'd written this. This is Fulton Sheen. This ain't me. I don't even remember which one it was, but I think it was A Plea for Intolerance or something like that. If you've never read that essay, that is an essay that will get you really thinking about this message of accompaniment that we have in the church right now and how just misguided it is. Because what Fulton Sheen tells us is that we need to be intolerant.
Right. Yeah, that's important. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. But for red pilling, it's that one. Or I mean, Hilaire Belloc is rather controversially famous for a lot of unspeakable issues. He's got a practical little library of things that gets him put on lists too, depending on what you mean by red pilling, right? But if you want to know about the crisis in the church and the subversion of the church, I would go with if you've got a pretty good reading comprehension level, I would go with like Iota Unum. I can never remember the name of the author of that, but it details the council.
Romano Maria.
Yes, or actually by someone who does the defense of the council. A good one is The Rhine Flows into the Tiber, because he was actually sort of affiliated. The author of that was affiliated with like the pro council stuff afterwards. Or you can read like The Great Facade by Chris Ferrara about like about the state of the culture.
All right,
I'm a big fan of Chris Ferrara.
Nice. Yeah. I'm trying to get him on the show too. Yeah, Belloc. I have The Great Heresies, Characters of the Reformation, Restoration of Property, and the Servile State. Haven't read any of them yet. Haven't read Belloc yet at all.
If you want to read The Servile State, I would actually recommend you read Utopia for the Usurers and Economics for Helen, probably also. If you're trying to go for because I'm ideologically a distributist, which is sort of trying to take a Catholic social teaching and turn it into a quasi-political program, but it's not really an ideology because it doesn't have a clearly defined mechanism for implementing the ideas. And no, it's not socialism. The accusation that Hilaire Belloc was a socialist and that he and Chesterton were socialists was written in a book that also accused Belloc of being a Satanist. And right, and there was an English Catholic writer named Mackey, I think, who wrote just a 20-page pamphlet that annihilates that book, and only even in passing mentions how ridiculous the socialism claim was, because he was mostly zeroing in on the occultist claims about Belloc. But Belloc wrote Catholic Social Teaching. I mean, I've got a lot of his books on my shelf, including his book The Jews, which is his most controversial book ever written. A book, by the way, he gets called an anti-Semite, but his book opens with him saying he would stand in front of a German tank to save the life of the last Jew in Europe, and he wrote that in 1937. Kind of a terrible anti-Semite, honestly. But I've got that. I've got the Crusades. I've got his book on the French Revolution. Europe and the Faith.
Compilations? Do they have any like collections? Because I have one with Chesterton that has, probably about 5 of his works. I have one with C.S. Lewis, but just like the collected works. I have a John of the Cross. Do they have one of Belloc or anything?
I haven't seen that. I've seen collected essays of Belloc, and there's several of those, and I do recommend those. But there are also collections that'll have like some hard-hitting essay of his followed by poetry, because he was a poet and a playwright. But he also famously wrote a children's, it's a quasi-children's book. Let me find the precise name of this book, because it's one of the greatest things ever. So his book is Cautionary Tales for Children. Yeah. It's a Cautionary Tales for Children designed for the admonition of children between the ages of 8 and 14 years, is what it's called. And they were meant for an adult audience, because the Cautionary Tales for Children was a sort of a thing that was really popular as children's reading in that period. And so, like, here's some of the titles of the short stories in here. Jim, who ran away from his nurse and was eaten by a lion. Henry King, who chewed bits of string and was early cut off in dreadful agonies. Matilda, who told lies and was burned to death. Hilaire Belloc, writing for an adult audience who hated those kind of books. And it was a bestseller for years, right? So I don't recommend, I'm not going to read this to my toddler. But, Belloc is one of my favorites because I have a kind of a dark sense of humor. It's a holdover from my pre-conversion, right? And I'm working on it, but it does sort of, it's a little reassuring to know that I wasn't the only one, that I'm not the only Catholic, who has that kind of a hang up, I guess.
Oh, man. Great stuff, Anthony. I really appreciate it. How do we send more people your way?
You can find me on YouTube at Return to Tradition, or returntotradition.org, or on any audio platform like that.
Excellent. I really appreciate it, brother. Thank you very much. God bless you and your family.
God bless you and your family.
All right. Take care.